I don't think I ever really thought of it in terms of that. And first of all, I don't know what the life is that I wanted. Like early days, being like short, being 5 feet tall, you go to a dance and
No one has ever missed a film or show featuring everyone's favorite comedian, Danny DeVito. We all love him for his short stature, high-energy roles, and that iconic raspy voice. But while characters like Louie De Palma in Taxi lived life full of cynicism, the real Danny DeVito lives a life completely in awe of the true love of his life. In a town like Hollywood, where marriages last about as long as a carton of milk, he finally named her. Is she a co-star from one of his famous films? Who actually holds the key to DeVito's heart? The secret identity of Hollywood's most inseparable strangers. Danny always had a busy schedule in the past years, but there was surely someone who looked past the glitz of modern Hollywood and peered into the quiet, everyday reality of a woman who has stood by his side for over 50 years. The absolute love of his life is none other than the brilliant, Emmy-winning actress Rhea Perlman. Now you're seeing another familiar face, yes, because they've worked in several films together. For decades, audiences watched them play off each other's comedic timing, perhaps most famously as the delightfully terrible, neon-clad, television-obsessed parents in the 1996 classic Matilda. But away from the movie sets and the flashing cameras of the red carpet, Danny and Rhea were quietly building a bond that defied every standard rule of a celebrity romance. What makes Danny's declaration so fascinating today isn't just the sheer length of their history, but the bizarre, beautiful paradox of how they actually live their lives right now. If you look up their relationship status, you will find something entirely unexpected. They are separated. They do not live in the same house. They haven't shared a traditional white picket fence married life since 2017. Yet, if you ask either of them who the most important person in their universe is, their answers point right back to each other. They are, by all accounts, a couple of inseparable strangers, bound by an affection so deep that regular relationship labels simply broke down and gave up trying to categorize them. How exactly do two people express a profound, life-altering love when they don't even share a morning cup of coffee under the same roof? For Danny and Rhea, it comes down to a total restructuring of what loyalty looks like. They don't need the traditional boundaries of a standard marriage to protect what they have. Instead, they choose to show up for each other in the ways that actually matter. They speak on the phone constantly. They show up side by side at major family milestones, Hollywood premieres, and casual weekend dinners. When their daughter Lucy was performing on Broadway, or when their family collaborated on public projects, Danny and Rhea were right there laughing, joking, and radiating the comfortable, easy warmth of two people who know each other's souls inside out. The tense, everyday friction that tears so many couples apart simply evaporated once they allowed their relationship to change shape. This brings us to the ultimate question that leaves so many fans completely mystified. What is the actual secret to their marriage? How did they manage to survive the brutal meat grinder of show business without ending up in a bitter, multi-million-dollar courtroom battle? According to Rhea, the secret is surprisingly simple, yet incredibly difficult for most people to pull off. It is the total elimination of ego and the willingness to let the relationship evolve rather than forcing it to break. When they realized that living together under the same roof was causing too much tension, they didn't call the lawyers. They didn't launch a public smear campaign. Instead, they sat down, looked at the 5 decades of shared history, 3 beautiful children, and a mountain of mutual respect, and decided that their family unit was simply too precious to destroy over a piece of legal paperwork. They made a conscious choice to take divorce completely off the table. By refusing to legally end their marriage, they kept a sacred perimeter around their family. They transitioned from intense, passionate lovers into something far more durable, absolute, unshakable best friends. They allowed themselves the space to live separate individual lives while maintaining a fierce, protective, and unified front for their children and grandchildren. It is a masterclass in emotional maturity. They proved that you don't have to sleep in the same bedroom to be the anchor of someone's life. Their love didn't end. It just outgrew the standard definitions of modern romance. But how did this wildly unique, legendary dynamic even begin in a city as chaotic and competitive as New York? Parallel foundations, two solitary paths to the neon lights. Long before they ever crossed paths, Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman were running on completely separate tracks, each trying to navigate the complex world of performing arts while dealing with their own unique personal hurdles. To truly appreciate why their meeting felt like a cosmic alignment of stars, you have to understand exactly what they were up against individually. They weren't your typical, glossy, manufactured Hollywood starlets. They were gritty, authentic East Coast kids who had to fight tooth and nail for every single inch of spotlight they ever received. Danny DeVito's journey started in the working-class neighborhoods of Asbury Park, New Jersey. Growing up, he wasn't exactly tracking toward the glamorous life of a leading man. In fact, his entry into the working world was about as far from a movie set as you could possibly get. He spent his early days working as a beautician in his sister's local hair salon. It was a humble, practical gig, but it taught him how to connect with people, how to listen, and how to use his natural charisma to charm anyone who sat in his chair. When a client unfortunately passed away, her grieving family even asked Danny to style her hair for the funeral, an experience that led him to work part-time as a morgue cosmetologist. It was an unusual, bizarrely poetic start for a future Hollywood titan, and it grounded him in a way that regular actors never experienced. But the call of the stage was too loud to ignore. Danny eventually enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, initially just to take makeup classes for the salon, but he quickly fell head over heels in love with acting. He knew the odds were stacked against him. In an industry obsessed with tall, chiseled leading men, Danny stood at just under 5 feet tall. But instead of letting his short stature hold him back or make him bitter, he weaponized it. He realized that his unique look, combined with an explosive, high-octane energy and a raw, raspy voice, made him completely unforgettable. He began scraping by in the late 60s off-Broadway theater scene, even sharing a cramped Manhattan apartment with a fellow unknown actor named Michael Douglas, where they split a rent of $75 a month. He was putting in the grueling hours, performing in obscure plays like Shoot Anything with Hair That Moves, waiting for the one break that would prove he belonged. Meanwhile, just across the river in Brooklyn, Rhea Perlman was fostering her own fiercely independent creative spirit. Raised in a vibrant Jewish household, Rhea was naturally sharp, incredibly witty, and completely uncompromising in her approach to life. She didn't look like the typical starlets of the era either, and she had absolutely no desire to play the traditional, passive female roles that Hollywood kept churning out. Rhea wanted characters with teeth. She wanted to play women who were loud, funny, and unapologetically flawed. She began her career off-Broadway in the early 70s, landing a small role in a production called Dracula Sabbath. Like Danny, she was grinding through the independent theater circuit, refusing to change her unique style or compromise her voice just to fit into a corporate mold. She was raw, she was fiercely talented, and she was waiting for a spark. So, how did these two fiercely independent, unconventional New York actors finally collide? It all came down to a single fateful night, on January 17, 1971. Rhea went out to an off-Broadway theater to support a close friend who was performing in a single-night production of a play called The Shrinking Bride. Her friend was on stage, but the moment Danny DeVito walked out from the wings, the entire theater seemed to shift. Danny was playing a highly eccentric, energetic character, and his stage presence was absolutely magnetic. Rhea couldn't take her eyes off him. The sheer force of his performance, combined with his unique charm, completely blew her away. She didn't just find him talented, she found him utterly mesmerizing. The moment the final curtain dropped, Rhea made a decision that would alter the course of both of their lives forever. She didn't wait around for him to notice her. She boldly marched backstage, determined to meet this fascinating actor immediately. As she would later confess in interviews, she came on to him big time, utterly charmed by his quick wit and warm demeanor. The chemistry between them was instantaneous, explosive, and entirely undeniable. They stayed up talking, laughing, and realizing they shared the exact same dark sense of humor and fierce passion for the craft. Within just 2 short weeks of that chance backstage encounter, they packed up their things and moved into a tiny apartment together. They didn't need to date for years to figure it out. They knew instantly that they had found their missing piece. So, how did this wildly unique, legendary dynamic even begin in a city as chaotic and competitive as New York? The spark, a chance encounter in a dim theater. It all came down to a single fateful night on January 17, 1971. Rhea went out to a tiny, dimly lit off-Broadway theater to support a close friend who was performing in a single-night showcase of a play called The Shrinking Bride. Her friend was up on stage doing their absolute best, but the very second Danny DeVito walked out from the backstage wings, the entire energy of the theater completely shifted. Danny was playing a highly eccentric, manic character, and his stage presence was absolutely magnetic. Rhea found herself completely unable to take her eyes off him. The sheer force of his performance, combined with his utterly unique physical presence and booming charm, completely blew her away. She didn't just find him talented, she found him mesmerizing. The moment the final curtain dropped, Rhea made a bold, impulsive decision that would alter the course of both of their lives forever. She didn't wait around or hope he would notice her out in the crowd. She marched right backstage, navigating the cramped, chaotic hallways of the theater, determined to meet this fascinating actor immediately. As she would later confess in interviews, she came on to him big time, totally charmed by his quick wit, intense eyes, and incredibly warm demeanor. The raw chemistry between them was instantaneous, explosive, and entirely undeniable. They stayed up for hours into the cold New York night, talking, laughing, and realizing they shared the exact same dark sense of humor, working-class backgrounds, and fierce passion for the craft of acting. Within just 2 short weeks of that chance backstage encounter, they packed up their meager belongings and moved into a tiny, cramped Manhattan apartment together. They didn't need to date for years to figure it out. They knew instantly that they had found their missing piece. Living in that tiny apartment, they were a couple of starving artists surviving on hope, cheap meals, and a shared dream. They shared a deep appreciation for the avant-garde theater scene, frequently collaborating on small, independent projects and short films just to keep their creative fires burning. Those early years were tough financially, but emotionally, they were completely rich. They insulated themselves from the harsh rejections of the acting world by creating a safe haven within their relationship. When Danny couldn't land a role because casting directors couldn't see past his height, Rhea was there to remind him of his genius. When Rhea felt discouraged by the rigid expectations of female casting, Danny was her biggest cheerleader. They grew up together on those gritty New York streets, forming an unbreakable foundation of mutual respect and creative partnership before a single dime of Hollywood wealth ever entered the picture. But moving in together in a tiny New York apartment was one thing. Surviving the massive, high-stakes pressure cooker of Hollywood fame was another challenge entirely. Climbing the Hollywood mountain together. By the mid-70s, the theater scene just wasn't paying the bills anymore, and the couple packed up their meager lives to head west to Los Angeles. Hollywood was a completely different beast. A brutal, high-stakes pressure cooker designed to break people who didn't fit a specific, glossy mold. Yet, instead of tearing them apart, the move to California ignited a professional explosion that would turn both Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman into household names. The first massive breakthrough belonged to Danny. In 1978, he walked into an audition for a new sitcom about a group of eccentric New York City cab drivers. The show was Taxi, and the role was Louie De Palma, a tyrannical, short-tempered, and utterly despotic dispatcher who ran the Sunshine Cab Company from a wire cage. Danny knew he had to make an impression, so he walked into the casting room, stared down the show's creators, and aggressively barked, "Who wrote this shit?" before slamming the script onto the table. It was a wildly risky move, but the producers fell in love with his fearless, high-octane energy instantly. He got the part, and almost overnight, Danny became the breakout star of one of the biggest shows on television. His performance earned him both a Golden Globe and an Emmy Award, cementing his place as a master of character comedy. As Taxi dominated the airwaves, the show's writers and producers, specifically a talented duo named Glenn and Les Charles, noticed something special about Danny's real-life partner. They decided to bring Rhea onto the show for a recurring role as Zena Sherman, the sweet, remarkably patient girlfriend to Danny's volatile Louie De Palma. Watching them act opposite each other on national television was an absolute treat for audiences. Their real-life chemistry bled onto the screen, giving a bizarrely sweet heart to an otherwise cynical character. But while playing the sweet girlfriend was fun, the executive producers saw a completely different spark of potential buried inside Rhea. They realized she was capable of something much sharper, tougher, and fiercely independent. When Taxi began winding down, Glenn and Les Charles moved on to create a brand new sitcom set in a cozy Boston watering hole. The show was Cheers, and they wrote a character specifically with Rhea in mind. They wanted her to play Carla Tortelli, a fiercely sarcastic, quick-witted, and fiercely protective barmaid who was always ready to deploy a devastating one-liner to any customer who crossed her line. When Cheers premiered in 1982, it initially struggled heavily in the ratings, nearly facing early cancellation. But the network stuck with it, and the show eventually evolved into one of the most celebrated and widely viewed cultural phenomenons in American television history. Rhea's portrayal of Carla didn't just capture the hearts of viewers, it completely dominated the television industry. Over the course of the show's legendary 11-season run, Rhea became an absolute powerhouse, earning a staggering 10 Emmy Award nominations and winning the Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress, a record 4 times. She became the most decorated star on the series, praised for bringing a gritty, working-class vulnerability to a character who could have easily been a flat caricature. Suddenly, Danny and Rhea found themselves sitting at the absolute pinnacle of show business. They were no longer the struggling, starving artists splitting a $75 rent in Manhattan. They were public icons, navigating a massive wave of 80s fame and fortune that would have easily crushed a less stable relationship. Hollywood history is littered with the tragic remains of couples who couldn't handle simultaneous success, where professional jealousy and competing egos slowly poisoned the romance. But Danny and Rhea operated under an entirely different set of rules. They viewed their individual successes not as separate victories, but as wins for the collective team they had formed back on the off-Broadway stage. They insulated their private lives from the toxic gossip machine by remaining each other's ultimate sounding board. Danny would sit in the audience at Cheers tapings, cheering louder than anyone else in the studio, while Rhea remained a fierce advocate for Danny as he transitioned his television success into a massive feature film career, landing legendary roles in classics like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Terms of Endearment, and Twins. They had conquered the mountain together, but their biggest joint adventure was still to come. How did they manage to anchor this exploding Hollywood empire while building a real, grounded family behind closed doors? Building the empire and the inner circle. The answer lies in their absolute refusal to let the toxic standards of show business dictate how they ran their household. By the early 80s, Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman were no longer just a pair of lucky actors working on popular television shows. They were officially a Hollywood power couple. On January 28, 1982, after more than a decade of living together in domestic bliss, they finally decided to make it official and tied the knot in a small private ceremony. But getting married wasn't just a romantic milestone for them. It marked the beginning of an era where they would blend their creative genius to build a massive entertainment empire, all while fiercely protecting a growing family from the intrusive lenses of the paparazzi. On the professional front, the couple decided that simply acting in other people's projects wasn't enough. They wanted to control their own creative destinies. In 1991, Danny co-founded Jersey Films, a powerhouse production company that would go on to shape the landscape of 90s and early 2000s cinema. With Rhea as his ultimate sounding board and creative partner, Jersey Films produced a string of massive critical and commercial hits, including the genre-defining Pulp Fiction, the sharp comedy Get Shorty, the sci-fi cult classic Gattaca, and the critically acclaimed biographical drama Erin Brockovich, which landed Danny an Academy Award nomination for Best Picture. But perhaps the most beautiful intersection of their professional and personal lives occurred in 1996, when they decided to bring Roald Dahl's beloved children's book, Matilda, to the big screen. Danny didn't just star in the film, he directed and produced it, creating a masterpiece of whimsical, dark children's cinema. He cast himself as the utterly despicable, dishonest car salesman Harry Wormwood, and he cast Rhea as his equally terrible, bingo-obsessed, neon-clad wife, Xena Wormwood. Watching them play these hilariously awful, neglectful parents on screen was a masterclass in comedic chemistry. They threw themselves into ridiculous roles with absolute gusto, knowing that their real-life bond was so bulletproof that playing miserable partners on screen was just a fun game. Mara Wilson, the young actress who played Matilda, later revealed that during filming, when her own mother was tragically battling terminal cancer, Danny and Rhea quietly stepped in behind the scenes, taking her into their home, keeping her spirits up, and treating her like one of their own children. This deep sense of parental empathy wasn't an act. It was exactly how they operated within their own household. While building their multi-million-dollar production empire, Danny and Rhea were actively raising 3 children. Lucy, born in 1983, Grace, born in 1985, and their only son, Jake, born in 1987. In a town where celebrity kids are frequently paraded in front of cameras or left in the care of rotating teams of nannies, Danny and Rhea made a pact to give their kids a remarkably normal, grounded childhood. They fiercely guarded their privacy, refusing to let television cameras or tabloid reporters cross the threshold of their family home. Their children grew up with a unique perspective on their parents' massive fame. They knew their mom was the fiery barmaid on Cheers, and their dad was a cinematic icon. But at home, Danny and Rhea were just mom and dad, making dinner, driving carpools, and instilling working-class East Coast values in a wealthy Los Angeles neighborhood. Jake DeVito would later reflect that his parents were masters at keeping their home environment feeling incredibly solid, safe, and entirely disconnected from the superficial anxieties of the Hollywood ecosystem. This intense focus on family solidarity served as their armor against the chaos of the entertainment industry. They had successfully built an empire, conquered the box office, and raised a tight-knit family that genuinely loved being around one another. But as the children grew older and eventually left the nest to pursue their own adult lives, the quiet space left behind inside the massive DeVito-Perlman household began to expose an unexpected shift in the couple's long-standing dynamic. What happens to a legendary 30-year partnership when the chaotic noise of raising a family finally fades away? The cracks in the porcelain, growing apart in the spotlight. For Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman, the answer came in the quiet autumn of 2012, sending absolute shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Up until that point, they were viewed as the golden standard of Hollywood stability, the ultimate proof that a showbiz marriage could actually survive the temptations and ego trips of fame. But behind closed doors, a subtle, painful drift had been taking place over the course of several years. When the children finally packed up, moved out, and began establishing their own adult lives, the massive family home suddenly felt incredibly empty. Without the daily focus of co-parenting and the vibrant energy of a bustling household, the couple was forced to confront a reality they had successfully managed to outrun for decades: the intense friction of their everyday lives. The initial announcement of their separation in October 2012 caught fans and friends completely off guard. Tabloids immediately spun wild, speculative narratives, attempting to pin the blame on everything from professional jealousy to hidden Hollywood scandals. But the reality of their split was far more human and relatable. It wasn't an explosive, dramatic blowout that destroyed their bond overnight. Instead, it was the slow, steady accumulation of small tensions that naturally build up when two fiercely independent, incredibly stubborn creative powerhouses share the same tight space for 40 years. Rhea would later candidly admit in interviews that the transition was excruciatingly difficult. She didn't sugarcoat the pain, openly stating that the initial breakup was a rough, emotionally devastating period for the entire family. They attempted to bridge the gap in 2013, briefly reconciling and moving back in together to give their traditional marriage one last, dedicated shot. They desperately wanted to preserve the beautiful life they had spent a lifetime building, but by 2017, they had to face a hard truth. The daily reality of living under the exact same roof simply wasn't working anymore. The constant face-to-face friction was beginning to erode the deep affection they still carried for each other. They realized that if they kept trying to force themselves into a conventional, white picket fence marital mold, they would eventually end up resentful, bitter, and angry. To save the love, they had to change the living arrangement. They made the heavy, mutual decision to separate permanently, with Danny moving into his own space while Rhea remained in hers, living with her small dog. It was a profound crossroad that typically marks the end of a family unit, usually followed by an army of aggressive divorce attorneys carving up millions of dollars in shared assets. But Danny and Rhea flatly refused to play by Hollywood's cynical rules and decided that a piece of paper from a divorce court shouldn't dictate the value of their shared history. They had survived the gritty off-Broadway streets together, climbed to the top of the television world side by side, and raised 3 beautiful children. Why throw all of that history into the meat grinder of a bitter legal battle? They chose a completely uncharted path. They allowed their marriage to die so that their relationship could live. By moving into separate homes, they successfully removed the constant, everyday pressure that was causing the tension. The moment they stopped trying to be a traditional husband and wife, a remarkable transformation occurred. How does a couple go from the heartbreaking pain of a permanent separation to becoming absolute, unshakable best friends? The new frontier, redefining love, at 81. They did it by entirely rewriting the rulebook of what a successful relationship is allowed to look like. When the heavy, exhausting legal battles of standard celebrity divorces are stripped away, what remains is a pure, uncomplicated devotion. Today, at 81 years old, Danny DeVito lives a life completely enriched by this unconventional arrangement. He and Rhea engage in long, winding telephone conversations daily, sharing the trivial updates of their routines, laughing at the same inside jokes they forged in cramped New York theaters, and anchored securely by an intimacy that traditional marriage simply couldn't protect. They have built an unbreakable modern sanctuary where the old anxieties have completely evaporated, leaving behind a profound friendship. The ultimate, beautiful manifestation of this enduring connection is their rapidly expanding family inner circle. Danny and Rhea are no longer just a legendary Hollywood power couple. They are proud, completely doting grandparents who regularly team up to spoil the next generation of the DeVito lineage. Whether they are gathered together to celebrate a hectic holiday, standing side by side supporting their children's latest creative endeavors, or simply marveling at their grandchildren, they radiate the comfortable, easy warmth of two souls who are entirely intertwined. They have proved to a cynical world that a family unit does not have to fracture just because a living arrangement changes. Their love didn't fail, dissolve, or disappear. It simply grew out of its original container and transformed into something far more durable. When Danny DeVito looks back at his incredible, star-studded journey, he doesn't see a landscape of romantic regret or a collection of bitter, broken Hollywood promises. He looks out at a 50-year legacy of profound mutual respect, creative triumph, and a family that remains completely unshakable. By refusing to let the rigid expectations of society destroy what they built, he and Rhea protected a rare, priceless bond. At 81, his public admission isn't a tragic longing for a past that slipped away, but a celebration of a beautiful reality that still exists today. Rhea Perlman remains the absolute love of his life, because she is his anchor, his ultimate partner, and his truest friend, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that bravely dare to rewrite their own happy ending. If you liked this video, leave a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more.